and that in this country is so wrapped up and rooted in the systemic racism of our healthcare system that people are having to get their treatments in church basements because they're so afraid of coming to the emergency room, then I don't know that any amount of commercials or talks or newspaper articles is ever going to catch you up to speed.
Hey, Sickle family. I'm Wunmi Bakare.
I'm Christelle Salomon.
With a special guest appearance from Dima Hendricks.
And we would like to welcome you to the Through the Genes podcast,
where we talk about living,
healing,
recovering,
and exploring transformative therapies for sickle cell disease.
We will also talk about our individual journeys and the bond that we have built as Sickle Cell Sisters.
Hello, Sickle family, and welcome to Season 2 of the Through the Genes podcast, where we have real, unfiltered conversations about sickle cell disease, advocacy, and cutting-edge treatments. I am your host, Dima Hendricks, and I have the amazing Sickle Sisters with me. I have
Wunmi Bakare. Hey, Sickle family.
And
Christelle Salomon. Good to see y'all again.
We are honored today to be joined by Dr. Sharl Azar, Medical Director of the Comprehensive Sickle Cell Disease Treatment Center at the Massachusetts General Hospital, and nationally recognized advocate who is cutthroat, by the way, and passionate about dismantling racial disparities in medicine and access to sickle cell care. Welcome to one of my favorite people, Dr. Sharl Azar.
I am so honored to be with you guys. So honored. Thank you 1,000 times for inviting me. I'm so happy to be with you.
And thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Always good to see you out of the hospital, Dima. Always good.
And healthy.
We love a healthy warrior. Dr. Azar, your voice and the space you occupy precedes you. These two ladies have talked endlessly about you, mostly Dima. And so I feel like this episode has been a long time coming. And I'm very, very grateful that we have an opportunity to chat with you today. Because this season, I think we can't talk about any of the topics we have without really highlighting the impact of race in sickle cell disease. I think it's a foundational piece of this conversation. And so to help us better understand race relations and sickle cell disease within the healthcare system. In season one of the things that we touched on in episode 1 was the history of sickle cell disease research in Western medicine. And it was a history lesson for us to understand why sickle cell treatments have taken so much time to happen. And so today I'm hoping you can contextualize how race and sickle cell disease impacts medical advancement and care delivery for warriors. So with that, I wanted to ask you, can you help us understand how race has played a role from 1910, when the first sickle cell patient was diagnosed, to present day? Take us through that journey.
So it's an excellent question. And I mean, I think I should tell your audience right off the bat what you guys already know about me, that I'm very blunt about this. So, sorry, not sorry in advance. I'm going to be really honest about this topic. And I think the thing that's most important to get across right off the bat is that our healthcare system in this country is intrinsically racist. And it has been from its inception. And, you asked about going all the way back to 1910. I could go back even further and tell you how the lived experience of our warriors when they come to the emergency room or they're admitted to the hospital is tied back to American chattel slavery, where this physician, and I cringe at even referring to him that way, Dr. Samuel Cartwright, described this made-up disease called dysesthesia ethiopis. And the crux of this made-up disease was that Black people experience pain differently than white people experience pain. So that you could justify, as a white slave owner, that you could beat your slave and not expect them to experience the pain from the whip the same way that you would if you were to turn the whip back onto yourself. And that treatise, that made-up disease, was so foundational in the way medical care in this country was delivered right from the inception of this country, even before it was a country, that I would contend that it is still the foundation of why my patients get treated differently when they come into the emergency room with pain than the white person 2 beds down from them.
Thank you for the bluntness is refreshing, because there's no point in dibble-dabbling around a topic when you can talk about the topic and keep it so real. And the only way to really forge some positive change and really completely turn directions from where we're heading, is to be honest about this. That really does, like, explaining that history explains the foundation of like why we see what we see today. And so many warriors talk about going to the hospital and not being believed, saying that they have pain and being dismissed, and just understanding that there was actually a medical condition that people thought was legitimate. It really provides a different level of context for why we go through as warriors what we go through today. So thank you for being so blunt and for sharing that. And we know that not just sickle cell warriors, but Black patients are often undertreated for pain due to racial biases in medicine. How do these misconceptions about pain tolerance impact sickle cell patients specifically? And how do we build trust between sickle cell patients and the medical community in our present day?
I'm so glad that you framed it that way, because it really is about the medical community having to earn that trust from our patient population, from our warriors, and not the other way around. I think the racial impacts of this disease, the fact that this is a unique disease and that it largely is impacting Black and brown people, touches every aspect of the way by which we understand the disease, the tools that I have as a provider in my toolkit to be able to manage patients with the disease, the research that I'm able to do, the way we're able to move the needle forward or backwards in the way we take care of this disease. It's all impacted by race. If you compare a sickle cell disease, for example, to cystic fibrosis, a comparison that I think probably many of your listeners have heard many times before, you can see the stark contrast, right? Cystic fibrosis, horrible disease, terrible, terrible illness. Not at all to demean the illness in any way, but largely a disease of white people. Sickle cell disease, largely a disease of Black people. Incidence of sickle cell disease in this country, much higher than that of cystic fibrosis. And yet, we're outspent at the NIH 3-1. We're outspent by industry funding 2-1. We're outspent philanthropically 80-1. And when you compare sickle cell disease to hemophilia, which is another disease that I take care of as a hematologist, hemophilia is federally funded. The federal government sets a standard of care. They deliver millions and millions of dollars to hemophilia treatment centers around the country to be able to meet that standard of care. And at the end of every year, if they don't use that money, the hemophilia treatment centers return those millions of dollars to the federal government. And it is written expressly into the letter of the law that those leftover dollars cannot come to sickle cell disease. So the foundations have been stacked against sickle cell disease right from the beginning, and it impacts everything from the way that we're able to conduct studies to my ability to provide basic access to care for my patients.
You were quoted in the Boston Globe and saying that if sickle cell disease was primarily affecting white people, that this disease would be cured a long time ago. And I think you quoted that in 2023. And so I've been kind of following that journey. And I always wanted to know from you, as a hematologist, and you've been focusing on sickle cell disease for years, in your opinion, what are the other systematic factors that contribute to these discrepancies?
And systematic factors, Dima, do you mean like besides race?
Besides race.
It's hard to like move around that boulder because that is such a boulder in the way that we're able to care for our patients. But yeah, I mean, if you look around, if you manage to be able to stick your head around that boulder and try to see what other things have fallen apart for it, at the end of the day, sadly, I will contend that it all comes back to race. But I think, our healthcare system was not built to care for this patient population. Our healthcare system is not designed in its modern iteration to be able to care for a disease that touches every single organ in the body. As healthcare has moved forward, has become more corporatized, as medical science itself has grown, and we've come to learn a lot more about the way our bodies amazingly work, medical care has become a lot more fractured. It's become a lot more subspecialty driven. It's moved a long ways away from a medical home model where primary care is sitting at the center and the subspecialties really help to kind of serve our primary care doctors. And as a result of that, a disease that touches every single organ of the body that relies on a multidisciplinary team or on multiple specialties to care for it does not get well cared for in that model. As a hematologist, I have had to learn how to manage a lot of things outside of the wheelhouse of a hematologist in order to be able to care for patients living with sickle cell disease. This is one of the biggest reasons why, when my patients are admitted to the hospital, one of my other hematology colleagues who doesn't know anything about sickle cell can't just step in and manage my patients the way that I would be able to step in and manage a patient who has a number of other hematologic conditions. It really requires a level of expertise and a commitment to understanding the way by which this disease can affect organs that, I as a hematologist wouldn't have otherwise had to think about since medical school.
So many sickle cell patients have to visit the ER for pain management due to a lack of specialized care. What would you say are the biggest structural barriers preventing access to comprehensive care?
Boy, I mean, I'll speak about this. This is such a great question. I think I'll speak about this in kind of twofold way. I think first and foremost are, for a disease that has impacted patients from the day that they come into this world until the point that they're entering adulthood, you all know very, very well that this is a disease that really touches people outside of the hospital every bit as much as it does inside the hospital, right? So there are huge structural barriers to even accessing care before you even get to the hospital that make it really challenging for people to be able to even see their doctor. If we go back into history again and we look at, redlining, or the concept of redlining, where the city planners literally drew lines on the map and decided where certain segments of the population were going to be allowed to live or not live, you can see that my patients don't live anywhere near where my clinic is. They have to travel many, many miles to be able to get to me. They don't have access to primary care in their backyard. They don't have access to healthy food or clean air or even clean water in their backyard. And then they have to somehow pay for the transportation to come in all those many miles, or the childcare to put up their kids somewhere while they're gone for 3 hours to be able to make that journey. The deck is stacked against even being able to access care. Then you get to the hospital. And then when you get to the hospital, you're exactly as you just said, not believed, not taken seriously, and not made to feel welcome. So why did you then have to go spend all of these hours and time and hard-earned dollars putting up your kids or finding a babysitter and finding transportation in order to be able to make it all the way into a place where you're not going to feel seen or heard in any way, shape, or form? So I think there are things we need to do to try to overcome the social determinants of health that form this huge barrier to care, to just getting to care. And then when we get to care, then there's enormous amount of legwork that needs to be done on education, on awareness, on understanding that allows our patients to be able to be better seen and heard when they actually show up to the hospital first place.
I'm curious if you feel like this racism has also played a part in how providers are educated about sickle cell. And you talked about how there was this disease that people believed Black folks had, that they experienced pain differently. But there's also the flip side of it when we're in the hospital. It's not just that they already believe that our pain is different, but that they don't believe what we have to say. Can you talk about how racism plays specifically a role in that piece?
Sure. I mean, the easy answer to your first question is duh. Of course, racism plays a big role in all of this. It's the biggest reason why I can't do anything, unfortunately, in my day-to-day job. But yeah, I mean, the point that you just made, Christelle, about education is so important, because from my earliest days of my medical education, sickle cell disease was not a part of the landscape. So if I go all the way back to medical school, I had my sickle cell education in medical school consisted of a single 15-minute talk on sickle cell disease that was titled, and I'm not making this up, the title of the talk was Sickle Cell Disease, the Rest of the World's Problem. And that was the actual lecture that I received in my training about sickle cell disease. And that tells you how far behind we are in just educating medical trainees about the disease itself. I teach the sickle cell lecture now at the Harvard Medical School, and they graciously have given me 30 whole minutes to talk about sickle cell disease, which is double what I got when I was a medical student. But honestly, you could talk about it for hours upon hours. And it is startling to me how little we talk about sickle cell disease in medical education, because sickle cell disease was the very first congenital illness for which we knew what the direct genetic cause was. If we're talking about kind of foundational diseases, sickle cell disease should be right there. It should be a case study for medical students to be learning from for the rest of their medical education. But it isn't. Why is that? Why, when it's so seminal, when it's so genetically clear, when it's so foundational, do we not use sickle cell disease as this unique example to teach medical students? Because it's a disease of Black and brown people. And because people don't think that they're going to encounter it, or if they do encounter it, that it's something that they can write off. I'll tell you, like, when I first came to work, one of my colleagues, who shall go unnamed, said to me, I don't know why you do this, because sickle cell disease isn't even a hematologic disorder. They really just need someone who can just manage their pain and just give them pain medications. And this is coming from a hematologist, right? So we do get training in sickle cell disease in our hematologic training. And so this is someone who had some training in this disease and apparently through his entire duration of training doubted that he even needed to know anything about this illness. So that's how far behind we are. Like, a lot of what we've had to do in building our program at Mass General has been education, education, education. We're training the medical students, we're training the nurses, we're training the residents, we're training the fellows so that no matter who touches our patients, they will understand how to be able to take care of them.
Okay, mind blown. I did not know this information that you are sharing now. So thank you for sharing. I want to make a little transition right now because this podcast, of course, is called Through the Genes. And so I really want to hone in and focus on curative options in gene therapy. So my question is to you. How inclusive are current gene therapies and transplant trials for the sickle cell community, particularly Black and African populations? I know what you're about to say. Please feel free to answer.
Not. The answer is not. Gene therapy is super exciting, right? We're excited about gene therapy. We're excited about what directions it's going to go. We're excited about what future iterations are going to be. We're excited about where it's at right now. And one of the things that I'm most excited about gene therapy is that it got the rest of the world to think about sickle cell disease for the first time ever. When before have we ever had articles in the New York Times about sickle cell disease? That's pretty awesome. And so I'm very grateful that at least it has raised some degree of awareness so that people know that this disease existed. But, one of the things I've said repeatedly since gene therapy first came on the market in December 2023, commercially, is that the decisions that we make right now as a healthcare community in this country and in Western Europe, which are the only places really that gene therapy is commercially available in large part, directly impact the way by which we're going to be able to roll out gene therapy or allotransplants in the rest of the world where the vast majority of people with sickle cell disease are actually living. So when we're talking about the places where sickle cell disease is the most endemic, those are parts of the world that cannot even get access to hydroxyurea. So how in the hell are we going to be able to get them access to a therapy that requires a treatment journey that from beginning to end takes a year, that is extremely resource intensive? We were talking earlier about all the social determinants of health that are stand up as barriers for patients getting access to care. Well, what if you took that care and multiply it fivefold? What if now, instead of having to see your doctor every 3 months, you had to see your doctor weekly? Or you had to see your doctor monthly? What if now you had to figure out how you're going to put up your kids for childcare that much more frequently? We are making decisions right now in how we systemically approach gene therapy that are going to directly lay the foundations of the models we're going to use to carry this to the people and the rest of the world. And we have to be extremely thoughtful and responsible about how we make these decisions, because we completely screwed it up when it came to hydroxyurea and other disease-modifying therapies, which is why the rest of the world rarely has access to these treatments. So are we going to create a world in very short order where you're going to have the United States and Western Europe that have access to a potentially transformative therapy, and then the rest of the world where patients are still dying at age 50?
Dr. Azar, first and foremost, thank you for your wisdom, because in highlighting the fact that your medical training was only 15 minutes, the instinctive reaction I had was anger. And being that I am born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria, I have numerous messages from warriors in my home country where we have one of the highest populations of sickle cell disease in the world, with questions around cell and gene therapy. And you are completely right, is that what we're doing now will be foundational for how it's established in other parts of the world. But as you are speaking, all I keep thinking is the stacks are so against this community, and I cannot wrap my head around why, besides color of skin and communities it directly impacts. And I find that incredibly infuriating, because if sickle cell was one of those disease areas that over the course of the individual's life, it doesn't progress and become more debilitating, regardless of what phenotype of sickle cell disease you have, then it would make sense why maybe we weren't getting the spotlight, the research, the funding dollars that we need. But yes, there are benefits. There's a sickle cell, I call it a sickle cell renaissance, right? We are on SNL, we are now written into characters on TV shows. It's a period of celebration. But I think for us in the community, our hope is that in these interpretations of sickle cell disease in main media, which people globally are able to access, my hope is that it becomes a global health issue. Because for far too long, it's just been characterized as this blood disease that primarily impacts people from African Caribbean descent. And I really appreciate the way you highlighted the conversation around cell and gene therapy, because in unpacking this topic, there is a trickle down effect of systemic racism and injustice that is still occurring, even now that transformative therapies are, for lack of a better word, all the rage. So I wanted to ask you, as a provider, you are sitting on a panel with 3 warriors who happen to have dabbled in patient advocacy. It's not an easy road, but we're still in the fight. And so I want to pose this question to you. How do you think that we as warriors, a Nigerian woman, a Nigerian Jamaican woman, and a Haitian woman, how can we galvanize a movement around sickle cell disease to work with providers like you to make this a global priority?
That is such an excellent question. And I appreciate you saying that I have wisdom at the beginning of your comments, because I honestly feel like the wisdom that I have is entirely the wisdom given to me by my warriors. The wisdom that I've inherited in this disease has really come from my patients. And we spoke earlier about how minimal my formal education was in sickle cell disease. Most of what I've come to learn about this disease has come from the wisdom of my warriors and their lived experiences with the disease. So I appreciate that, but it is their wisdom. Ultimately, it's all of your wisdom that I've inherited and that I've had the privilege of learning from. At the end of the day, we need to stop being nice. If we're going to, this is I say all the time in many of my talks that while sickle cell disease is a genetic disease and a molecular disease and a cellular disease, it is above and beyond all of these things a systems disease. And if we are not able to change the system, we cannot change the way that we provide care for our patients. And unfortunately, the system is unwilling to change. So we have to take what we need from the system. Part of that, I think, in my opinion, is that we need to stop focusing on awareness. Awareness is great. Awareness is important. But in 2025, if you are not aware that there is a disease that uniquely impacts Black and Brown people, that in most of the developing world leads to people not being able to live past the age of 15, 16, or 17 years old, that could be reversed if we could provide something as simplistic as penicillin to the developing world, and that in this country is so wrapped up and rooted in the systemic racism of our healthcare system that people are having to get their treatments in church basements because they're so afraid of coming to the emergency room, then I don't know that any amount of commercials or talks or newspaper articles is ever going to catch you up to speed. I think you should be ashamed of yourself if you're not aware that this disease exists and impacts people in this way. We have to stop investing our resources into awareness, and we have to start investing our resources into real advocacy. And this involves kicking and screaming into the ears of the people who are actually going to make changes. It is not acceptable, in my mind, that there have been 2 pieces of federal legislation that have been trying to go through the United States Congress for the last 5 years and have died in committee every single time. It is also not acceptable to me that for the longest time, the only 2 male Black senators in the US Senate had to be the ones to introduce this piece of legislation, right? I have a lot of privilege in my life. I have privilege because I'm a man. I have privilege because I'm a doctor. I have privilege because I'm not Black. And I have to use that privilege to be able to make up for the people that don't have that privilege. In my opinion, it's not fair that you as warriors have to carry this mantle yourselves. You have to live with the disease and you have to fix it at the same time. Boy, that's a really screwed up deal. The rest of us, those of us who are responsible for caring for you, who have taken it upon ourselves as our careers to be able to care for you, we have to speak up. We have to say it is not acceptable. We have to be able to demand better. Everything we've done at our center at Mass General has been because we have decided to not ask for permission and to ask for forgiveness later, and eventually to stop asking for forgiveness in the first place because there's nothing to forgive. And we all have to try to do that if we're going to actually move the landscape in any way, shape.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to say this. Thank you for saying that. As you were speaking, I don't know why I got emotional because I was like, it's incredibly hard to soldier through navigating a disease as complicated as sickle cell and still try and navigate advocacy as well. And I am extremely grateful that you said that because I hope other providers that listen to it, it's a point to note for them. Because even within the sickle cell landscape, there are some providers that we feel like are family because of the way they always will put their privilege on the line to make sure they secure for us. And there's some providers who it's a very different story. Even some that are, I believe, are using some level of it for notoriety and fame. And so thank you for saying that. Because you have shared that you welcome the uncomfortable conversation is why I'm able to articulate and say that. Because in certain rooms, as a patient advocate, I cannot share that with providers. And so I really, really appreciate you for giving us the floor to place our burdens and establish trust and know that providers like you will continue the fight for us when we aren't as strong, because the disease that we are powering through can be very crippling.
Thank you, Wunmi, for saying that and adding that, because it is frustrating to the point many of us had to take a step back. And warriors are just bumping their heads against the wall trying to figure out, how do we bridge the gap? How do we move forward? And I don't know, Dr. Azar, in my 20 plus years of advocacy, I felt like I could, just speaking for myself, I've been feeling so frustrated because it's been impossible to get funding for sickle cell disease, to collaborate with doctors, to our other healthcare providers, to have our voices heard on Capitol Hill. It is extremely frustrating. Do you have, I just asking you, for warriors who still want to continue to advocate while fighting this horrific disease, what strategies should we implement in this journey, if any?
So there are three things that I think I would sort of recommend to everybody who's listening. And I thank anybody who's listening who is struggling with having to just be a survivor of this disease while also having to try to fight for the greater community. That's an extraordinary burden for anybody to have to carry. I think there's sort of three approaches. First and foremost, the lowest hanging fruit, social media is a powerful weapon. And thankfully, I think generations younger than I am have really mastered that tool and continue to use that tool. And I think you may feel, if you're listening, like this is like your platform isn't big enough. Well, then tack on to one of the platforms of our with our many community-based organizations around the country, or tack on to the social media platform of your hospital or your care center if they have one, or even of your local politicians, and use that to amplify your voice even further. Beyond that, I would then go to your healthcare center. Your medical home should be advocating for you. If your providers are not doing this as a part of their daily work, then I would argue that they aren't doing all of sickle cell care. Part of sickle cell care is in caring for the patients in front of us, and part of it is in trying to change the system that's holding them back. And our institutions of higher learning also have an enormous amount of privilege. I can tap into the resources that my major hospital has. I can tap into the funding that it has. I can tap into the government advocacy office that it readily has, that I will tell you it has been using to advocate for other diseases or other causes for many, many, many years, and educate them about sickle cell disease and help them to utilize those resources for our sickle cell warriors. And then lastly, I think, and most organically, our state legislators, because I think this is where we're actually going to move the needle. Our state legislators actually want to listen, and they are looking for people who will give ethos, who will be able to give some backing to their pieces of legislation. These are the voices of our warriors. This is where warriors can really use their voices very powerfully. Our pieces of legislation that we've tried to move through the state legislature here in Massachusetts would not have moved if it was not for the fact that we filled the room with warriors who were willing to share their stories. And as we sat, and Dima, you were there with me, as we sat at the Massachusetts State House in that hearing room, when one of our pieces of legislation was moving before committee, we saw warrior after warrior who was willing, sometimes very tearfully, sometimes very difficult, for them to be able to get up to the microphone and tell their story. But those stories moved those legislators. And those legislators get to use those stories as really powerful tools to advance their bills that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do on their own. So reach out to your state legislators. It was literally a blind email to my state representative that got the bill written in the state of Massachusetts.
Wow. I don't even know how to start because I have all the feelings right now. I think it's important that you distinguished the roles that the medical system has to play and the patient advocate has to play, and the patient and the caregiver. So I started medical school in 2019, and I took a break from medical school because my sickle cell was just not trying to let me live. And so I was like, you know what? I need to take care of this. And it's interesting because I went into medical school with the idea that I wanted to empower patients the way that providers empowered me as a kid. And I remember my doctor sitting me down and saying, hey, like, do you understand what sickle cell is? Do you know why you're taking penicillin? Do you know what folic acid is? And I felt like my own expert, and I was like, this is so cool. And when I was transitioning to adult care, he told me like, okay, it's not the same out there. They don't care about you the same way. So you have to be your own advocate. You have to advocate for yourself and know all these things. I need you to know your pain management regimen. I need you to know your immunization record. So I knew everything by heart. But the reality is it didn't matter how much I advocated. In certain spaces, the patient is not the one responsible for creating the change. And so I love that you mentioned how, like, in a room full of legislators, our voice and our advocacy means a lot because it gives a perspective that they don't have. But in the hospital, I can tell a provider that this is my pain plan and they will ignore me. I can tell a provider that they can call another provider and they will ignore me. And it doesn't matter how much I speak. It doesn't matter if and as I navigated medical school, I felt more equipped to navigate the medical system, but I felt like the medical system hated me more. And I'm just so glad you touched on this because I'm just so firm on putting responsibility where it's due. And I think for so long, we've put the responsibility on the patient, on the warrior, on the caregivers to carry the burden that is just not meant for them to carry a responsibility that will actually not lead to tangible change, because I cannot order my own Norco. I cannot order my own Dilaudid. I cannot order fluids. I can't do that. So I think it's so important that you as a provider, with the authority that you have, to say these things, because it really gives perspective. People don't listen to me because I don't have a medical degree and I'm just a patient when I walk into the room. But you say that, like, I'm a provider and this is how I care for my patients. And this is what it takes. It's more than just I ordered this and I did that. It's the advocacy part, you using your voice to move the needle in a place that we necessarily can't, but then encouraging us and partnering with us to use our voices where it matters and where change can really be made. So sorry, that was like a 10-minute segue into my question, but I just had to make those points because it's just so powerful what you're sharing. And so as we talk about responsibility of the medical system versus responsibility for the provider, for the patient, how do we systematically ensure that future doctors are better trained to understand sickle cell disease? Because we got a longer lecture. We had I don't even know if it was more than 15 minutes now that I think about it. Out of our hundreds of slides in our hematology block, no more than 5 of them were about sickle cell. One of them said the word pain with zilch context. Maybe one of them said hydroxyurea. No mention of other disease-modifying medications. But when it came to cystic fibrosis, we learned all the drugs that were still investigational. And so I'm just like, let's get to it. How can we actually practically make a change to better prepare providers to care for us and to understand the enormity of sickle cell and not just fetal hemoglobin switching on and off?
I mean, it's such an important point because I think it's really tricky. I think it's really tricky. I think our medical education system is built around training future physicians to be able to manage disease, not necessarily on how to care for people. And I also think that our healthcare education system right now is really focused on trying to provide you with knowledge and information about things we can do a lot of things about. Right. So we talk a lot about cancer care, for example, in medical education, because we have huge amounts of treatment options for cancer care. And it's a really fastly developing field and it's really exciting. And there's a lot of science going on to it. And to be blunt, again, it's very lucrative. And so we teach future providers on how to be able to manage a lot of these diseases because we have treatments for them. When we have things we don't have a lot of tools in our toolkit for, we in the medical community feel like we don't want to talk about that. And it's I don't know whether it's coming from a place of guilt or shame or both. We also like to hear ourselves talk a lot. And so if we can't talk about it, then we don't want to talk about it. But there were so many times. I mean, there are many other examples of like rare illnesses in my medical education where, my teacher would say to me, yeah, oh, this disease is there, it exists, but you don't need to know a lot about it because there's not a lot we can do about it anyway. So really, we're just going to provide supportive care for those patients. And I feel like sickle cell disease has gotten bookended into that same category, right? And the problem is that it's our own damn fault that we know so little and that we have so little. And that if we continue to say, well, this is something we don't know a lot about and we can't do a lot about, so you don't need to learn a lot about it, then all we're doing is just perpetuating that for future generations going forward. I think the crux of the change is, I think, twofold. One is in patients, I think, voicing and working with their providers to be able to help get the message out. We bring one of our warriors with us to the medical school to directly teach the medical students. He's brave enough to sort of share his voice about that and share his story. And I can tell you, his story has way more impact than any lecture that I could possibly be giving those medical students. They will remember his face. They will remember his story. They'll remember his family way more than they're going to remember something that was on my 6th or 7th slide in my PowerPoint presentation. So if you as a warrior are willing to be an active participant, to partner with your providers as they continue to teach the next generation, that's so important. But at the same time, there needs to be greater public awareness. Our medical education system is going to reflect what the rest of the world is openly talking about. So the more we see things like Supercell on Netflix, or the more that we see the second episode of The Pit on HBO, the more we can see this disease on camera in front of people's eyes in the New York Times, there's going to be a greater push that our students need to learn about this because they're going to be asked about this when they graduate.
Now, I want to point this question to you, and I'm hoping you can answer it, but answer it obviously in your own way, which is, how can healthcare providers advocate for policies to ensure better long-term care and protection for patients like us? Because I will be honest with you, every time I approach a provider who's in the CGT space, the first thing they say is, yeah, we're just really excited about gene therapy and things like that. And for me, I'm like, But you do recognize this is not a fairy tale Disney story, right? We don't live happily ever after. We just don't. We're dealing with GI issues one day, we're dealing with iron overload the next. The complications of sickle cell disease are unique for every patient, and so every patient's recovery journey is going to look different. But until there are policies in place where providers feel a sense of accountability to making sure that my care post treatment continues to go well, we will all continue to feel like we're left in the cold. So I wanted to know, like, for you, what are some ways that healthcare providers can advocate for policies for this patient population?
So when you're talking about survivorship, which is a concept that has not been present in sickle cell disease, right? We've got, decades of data, research, resources invested in survivorship for cancer and cancer care, even in heart disease, even in COPD. We don't have any concept of what survivorship in sickle cell disease looks like. And it is high time we be able to build that. Because right now we're providing people with this amazing treatment that, as you pointed out, is sort of like, take this shiny new toy, but we are doing nothing to think about how we prepare people for what the other side of that looks like. So very profound experience in my early medical training was when gene therapy first came out in its first iteration for hemophilia. And I was sitting in this meeting of social workers, because of course, a meeting of doctors would not be talking about this, but a meeting of social workers where they were talking to a panel of people who had undergone the very first iteration of gene therapy for hemophilia, which, by the way, failed. And they had this conversation with the patients. And one of the patients said something so profound. He said, I've undergone gene therapy for hemophilia. Do I still get to call myself a hemophilia patient? It's been such a part of my identity, such a part of who I am, my daily life, since I was born with this disease, that now that I've undergone this treatment, do I still get to see the doctors and nurses who have been a part of my life since I was a child? Do I still get to go to advocacy events or community events related to my disease? Do I even get to still use this label, this term, to describe myself anymore? And I found myself, this patient said, having this existential crisis about, like, who am I? Like, what am I now post disease? The reality is that gene therapy in its current iteration is not a cure, right? It's not a cure. And it is we think about it as a transformative therapy, but I've now taken care of many patients who have been on the other side of gene therapy and who still experience crises and complications from their disease. I have one patient who unfortunately was told right from the get-go, you will never experience a pain crisis again in your life. And whether or not that was actually said to her, or whether that the point is that's what she heard, right? And so when she had her first pain crisis post gene therapy, she thought she was going crazy. And her parents heard this as well, right, from the providers. And her parents said, you're making this up. You can't possibly have pain anymore. You had gene therapy. We don't even in the medical field have good language yet to describe patients who have undergone gene therapy. I make a point of in every acute care plan for every one of my patients who has had gene therapy, and they still have an acute care plan because they still have sickle cell disease. I put it in there in bold and red that this patient still has sickle cell disease and absolutely still can be presenting with a pain crisis. Because the last thing that I want is for that patient to come into the emergency room and have that ER doctor look and say, oh, you had a transplant? Well, you can't have sickle cell disease anymore. You must be a drug seeker. And then we perpetuate this nonsense even further. So there's a long ways to go in defining what survivorship with sickle cell disease really looks like, in helping patients for the first time actually think about what a retirement plan is going to look like for them, because maybe they're going to be able to get to that point in their lives, or what's going to happen when their children are older, or all of these things that, like, warriors have been unfortunately trained to think that they're never going to be able to live to see in their lives. Our warriors might be able to see those things now very realistically. What does life like that look like when you've been told this entire time that you can just burn all of your worldly possessions because you're going to be stuck on the desert island for the rest of your life? Now you have to go back to the mainland. You have to go back to those possessions. What does that look like if you already ditched all of those possessions? That's what we have to start defining in sickle cell disease now.
Dr. Azar, thank you. As you were speaking, I was like, something happened to me a few months ago where I had a pain protocol. Well, she was a pain specialist, delete my care plan. I was in the ER. I came in with influenza, but the influenza was triggering what felt like a VOC to me in my body. And she basically was like, oh, we're switching you to Tylenol and we're deleting your pain plan because you had a transplant 5 years ago. So you shouldn't still require. And when I tell you, I was devastated because oftentimes you get labeled as patients, and in that moment I literally was trying to reason with her as woman to woman. I took everything else aside and I said, if you were pregnant and you were experiencing a lot of pain and your provider said they were going to give you Tylenol, think of how you would feel, is how I'm feeling in this moment. And as much as I tried to relate, she had made up her mind, and her no was absolutely no. And in that moment, I did something that I wouldn't recommend any patient do. I asked to be discharged. And the providers are like, no, we think you need to stay, da da da. Your liver numbers are in the 30,000s. They're the highest we've ever seen. And I said, I would rather you send me home and I die in peace than be here, be belittled, be made to think that everything that was going on in my body was all in my head. There's no need for that. I have built myself to where I am now. It's taken years, but I'm in a place where I can stand in my truth and say, I own who this woman is and this disease that I have. But in that moment, I chose it's much better to leave than to be in a place where I can't trust that my care is a priority for everyone that is in this healthcare system. So thank you for sharing the importance of survivorship, because Dima, as I talk about this all the time, I've said it in the community, I will die on this hill because I recognize my privilege. I recognize that I'm in my 30s. I recognize that I have access to mental services and I have a supportive family, but that does not mean everyone is like me. There will be some people whose family just believe you're well. Why are you still complaining? And so you putting that and sharing that example, I hope it comforts warriors who are on the other side, who maybe aren't as vocal and feel othered or alone in their experience, that they get to know that like some of us are still dealing with that too, and figuring out kind of who we are post treatment. But now I want to move to the lighter side of our show. This is my favorite part of our show because Dima and I know you, and Christelle, we all know you as Dr. Azar. Now I want to get to know Sharl. Okay, I want to know the man behind the white lab coats. The man who is living and thriving. So we're gonna ask you a series of 5 questions. Because we are generous people and we all went through a pandemic together, we're gonna give you 3 seconds, just 3, right? We need rapid fire. It's rapid fire. I need you to, like, when I say go, you go. Okay. But we're so generous. We're giving you 3 seconds. That's how much we like you. Most people, we were even given like 2. Okay. And so I need you to answer these questions really rapidly. So I'll start us off. And our first question is, if you have 30 seconds to give a TED Talk, what is your opening line?
The whole world is burning and all we have is a single bucket of water.
Wow.
Okay.
You tell me that in the TED Talk? Calm down. Listen. My ears are like antennas in that immediate moment.
Dialed in. Okay, I'll ask the next question. Okay. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, living or dead, who would it be?
Oh my God. These are like my medical school essays, guys. Okay, just one. I can only pick one.
Just one. Just one.
Okay, this is gonna sound really lame, but if I had to choose anybody, I would choose my great grandfather.
I
Because
love that.
my great grandfather I never met him, but I've heard so many stories, and his legacy has been so foundational in the way I grew up. So I would actually want to meet the man behind the stories.
That's awesome.
Amen. Best answer so far. Am I allowed to say that?
No, you're allowed to say that. I think the best answer. I agree.
Okay, I'm asking the next question. One thing that always makes you smile, no matter how bad your day is.
Oh God. Okay, this is also going to sound really lame, but I really actually mean this. It makes me smile. Going to clinic makes me smile. Because half of, part of my day, I see my patients in the hospital when they're really sick, when they're in crisis. And when I'm not seeing them, I'm fielding the 10,000 pages and phone calls, several of which I have received in the time that we have been recording this, about our patients who are in the hospital. And when I get to see warriors in clinic, oftentimes when they're out in the outpatient world, they're thriving, they're doing well, they're not in pain. They get to tell me about how they're doing in school or at work or that promotion they just got, or that truly one of the happiest moments of my life. They get to bring me their new baby. Those make me so happy. I say it to my team all the time. At the end of clinic, I feel exhausted, but I feel so fulfilled.
I really believe that because I've seen you in clinic and you're beaming from like ear to ear. So yeah, I believe that's true, ladies. That is very true.
That's such a good answer. Last two. If you were an element on the periodic table, what element would you be and why?
This is easy. My favorite element of all time, this is the nerdiest thing in the whole world, is an element called antimony. Antimony is important because antimony does nothing on its own, but it strengthens everything that it binds to.
I love a man with a plan. Okay. His answers are like so deep in the way that you're just kind of like, I like the way your mind works. Can I live in there for just an hour? I'm just asking
a little bit.
An hour in your mind.
I forgot antimony was on the periodic table. So I was like,
everyone
yeah,
does.
that's a thing.
Antimony's a
Wow.
helper.
Okay, that was the best helper. Okay, last question. What's one simple health tip everyone should know, but most people ignore?
I think remember why you're fighting in the first place. I tell my patients all the time when they're in the throes, the struggles of their disease, and they feel like they want to give up. And then the times when they're doing well and they're thriving, remember those times, because that's why we're trying to get through the difficult, dark times. There is absolutely no reason why we should be fighting as hard as we are to keep you alive, to keep you well, if you are not going to thrive and live well in those times that you are healthy. If you are going to spend those times in bed, laying up, doing nothing, not living your life, then why are we working so hard to keep you alive in the first place? It's not just about keeping you alive, it's about keeping you living.
Thank you, Dr. Azar. I just thank you for not only this conversation, but like Wunmi, I had an experience, and you were there. I had an experience where I wasn't treated too well in the hospital. But
Which one, girl? Which one?
No, but because you were there, I didn't have to fight. You and your team fought for me, and I didn't have to leave the hospital. I wanted to, but you told me to lay down, and you said you would handle it, and which you did beautifully and remarkably. So you are not only a man who talks it, but you're a man who walks it. And I thank you for that. Because of you, I feel like I'm thriving a little bit more now as a warrior, able to go back in the trenches and do this job again. So thank you for being here with us. Thank you for what you do in the community. And yeah, just thank you for being okay.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you for inspiring me to be doing this work every single day. Thank you for reminding me why I do this work every single day. Thank you for giving me the mission that has been the foundation of my entire life. I go to work every day to be able to do better by good people like you, who teach me so much, not only about the disease, but about life in general. And so I'm grateful to all of you guys for this.
This conversation has been everything. It's been raw, it's been real, but it's been so necessary. If there's one thing I hope our listeners take away, it's that some of us will see success, others will face setbacks, but together we are pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Thank you, Dr. Azar, for being here. I'm not going to repeat what's already been said. Just thank you. Like, genuinely thank you for helping us to be seen today, seen as more than just our diagnoses, more than just warriors, but just seeing us, seeing our humanity. And that is just so, so touching. So thank you so much. Listeners, we've got another episode coming. So make sure you stay tuned. If you want to catch us on the next episode or even a previous episode, be sure to check us out on anywhere you can catch your audio-visual content, whether that's YouTube, Audible, Spotify, Apple Music, you name it, we are there. Thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to see you on the next one. All right, y'all. Until next time.
Bye, Sickle family.
This show is brought to you by Beam Therapeutics, Synthago, and Kamal Therapeutics, with support from the UCSF Sickle Cell Center of Excellence, Through the Pain Inc., and Sickle Cell Product Sheet.